The left's attempts to squash the Reagan movie have failed, and viewers have propelled it forward with Newsweek reporting that it has crushed box office expectations. My name is Grace Riley, and this is the Weekend Spectator with Paul and Grace, here with Paul Kengor. Paul, so great to be with you.
Hey, good to be back again, Grace. Last time we talked, I was at Rancho del Cielo. Well, not exactly Rancho del Cielo, but the Reagan Ranch Center in Santa Barbara, which is probably about a 45-minute drive from Rancho del Cielo, because you got to go way up this hill to get to it. So yeah, we did a couple episodes we recorded there, and now we're back with classes rolling again. Institute for Faith and Freedom, Grove City College, our magnificent studio, the great Don Wolf there behind the glass, and the
Except this
magnificent
time,
Tessa Nave over here.
except this time I'm not there. Usually I'd be in
I
that
know.
studio with Tessa and Dawn, the great team at the Institute for Faith and Freedom, but I have a different
First time in
background now here
4
in Florida.
years. First time in 4
I
falls.
know, no back to
You're in
school for
Florida.
me. Kind of nice, I
No.
will say, but I miss all the people, but and the school, but kind of nice to not be starting classes for me right now.
It's nice not to have, this is what I tell people who've graduated, right? It's nice to not have to memorize things, right? And be tested on them. I think when I got out of school, what I enjoyed the most was, yeah, just memorizing and filling your head with stuff for a test and getting that brain fried feeling, right? And then the worst part, going into an exam, and I had this so many times as a biophysics major, right? I would walk in and I would see the exam and I'd say, what is this? Where did this come from? I stayed up all night studying at Scaife Medical School for 5 questions that I've never even heard of. Who wrote this test? So no more of that nonsense. You're free. You're free of that.
Exactly. We all know the feeling. It's so nice to be free from that. Finally, I mean, the sleepless nights studying,
Yeah.
I'll never get those hours back, but I did
No.
learn some things, so that's good at least.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
moving into the Reagan movie, it's done pretty well. It's been out for a week now, and after opening weekend, Newsweek has reported, along with a bunch of other sources, that it has exceeded the expectations in the box office, that following the end of opening weekend, it was ranked number 4. I believe now it's maybe surpassed, doing pretty well despite what leftist critics are saying.
Yeah, it's doing really well. So it debuted nationwide August 30th, right? That was Friday, so Labor Day weekend. And by the end of the weekend, it was top 5 for sure. Some reports 4, 3, maybe even 2. The only thing that was behind was Wolverine and Deadpool, which I don't know. I've never seen that movie. I hear Hugh Jackman is in it. I like Hugh Jackman. I thought Hugh Jackman was great in Les Mis, the movie version of that. So I'm a fan of his, but I've never seen Wolverine or any of that stuff. But that's a blockbuster, right? That's made like 660 million or something like that. And somebody told me yesterday that it would have been Labor Day or the day after Labor Day that the Reagan movie actually did better than Wolverine for that one day. So it's doing really well, and it's getting a lot of word of mouth impact. And I think everybody who's a Republican or a conservative now seems to be running to the theater to see it, because for one thing, they haven't had a reason to go to the theater in a long time, right? But now they have a reason to go. And so many people, Grace, are coming, their friends are coming back to them and saying, listen, you might have read this insane review by this wild lefty in this newspaper, the review in the Washington Post or New York Times or Boston Globe or Daily Beast that called it wretched, ugly,
The worst
execrable,
movie ever.
the worst movie of the year,
Anything
right?
you can think of. The worst, I think it might have been the worst movie ever, the worst movie of the year. Everything that you can think of to negatively describe this movie. They said it was
I-
like, you would think it was the worst movie reading these reviews, but then on the
oh,
other side, it's a complete opposite. And what you're saying about word of mouth is so true. We were talking just before we started recording. My family seeing the movie loved it, and they all brought friends. My mom and stepdad, grandparents, they're going back to it and bringing
yeah,
other friends, their neighbors that they're
seeing
friends
it
with.
twice. Yeah,
Exactly. So they're seeing it twice to bring other friends, because it's just had that impact on people where they haven't seen something like this in a long time. It is as we've been saying, especially as you've been saying, Paul, it's unifying, uplifting, patriotic, and it's just reminiscent of that time in America. And what's so funny is that when Reagan was alive, he never got this much hate. I mean, from these leftist critics, look at how the tides have turned there.
And see, that right there says a lot, because I'm writing a response to the critics on this. They're calling it, hagiography is a common thing that you see, which is like a canonization of a person. Saint Ronnie, as one person put it. But what a lot of these people don't understand, and I've looked up in a few of these cases the birth dates of the reviewers, okay, and they were, a couple of the really nasty ones were born mid 80s to late 80s, or in one case maybe even after that. It's hard to find, it's hard to get birthdays in some of these people. They don't have Wikipedia pages and whatever. But so they didn't actually live through the 80s. And being leftists and brought up in leftist colleges and indoctrinated there, they don't know about Reagan. They don't know about the end of the Cold War. If they actually did a little bit of research, if they actually lived through the time, I mean, here's a couple numbers. So Ronald Reagan in 1980 is elected by winning 44 out of 50 states, all right? 1984, he's reelected by winning 49 out of 50. 49 out of 50. Wins the Electoral College 525 to 13, won almost 60% of the vote. Tens of millions of Democrats voted for Reagan. I quoted this in our last interview. Walter Cronkite, who was the dean of anchors, CBS News correspondent, and a liberal. And he said at the time, I'm amazed that this presidency, nobody hates Reagan. Everybody likes him. I've never seen anything like this. I never thought in my lifetime I'd ever see anybody as president, as popular as president as Franklin Roosevelt. It's amazing how well liked he is. So I would tell these reviewers, what they're not getting is, our movie shows this popular, unifying president. That's not made up, dude. All right? I mean, that's not made up. And the movie is about the central cause and call of his life was the fight against Soviet communism, to win the Cold War. And you know what? He won the Cold War peacefully. When he's in front of the Berlin Wall, that speech really happened. That stuff with Gorbachev, he and Gorbachev shaking hands, working together, ending the Cold War, holding hands bedside with Tip O'Neill, the Democrat Speaker of the House, praying together. That happened. He and Nancy, head over heels, adore each other in love. True. And I've got a real shocker for you, folks. In the end of the movie, when Reagan rides off into the sunset at the Reagan Ranch for one final teary-eyed ride with John Barletta, the ranch hand, and you hear the overplay of Reagan's voice, written November 5th, 1994, telling the Americans he has Alzheimer's disease, he's now about to ride off into the sunset of his life. That actually happened. So I don't know what you want us to do. Do you want us to not have the Berlin Wall go down? You want us to pretend Reagan won 26 states? You want us to end this in World War III, nuclear Armageddon? This is a good story. We took all the politics out. There's no shots at Biden and the Democrats and Kamala. We gave you people who claim that you want unity and you don't want division. We gave you something unifying, a truly good, heartwarming story. And guess what? You hate it. All right. And you're angry about it, and you're calling it names, and you're using it as a tool to divide. I thought, Grace, I told you this, I think in our last interview, I thought the liberals would take this film and use it against Trump, right? That they would say, you Republicans, right? Here's a time when the country was unified, when there was a Republican president people liked, right? Unlike Trump. But some of these reviewers are so nasty and emotional and hate-filled that they can't even think strategically in a way to use this to their advantage. Just like, Reagan, worst movie I've ever seen, execrable, wretched, ugly. And but the good news is, what was the statistic that you were saying about?
Yeah. Yeah, so you can see this on your screen right now, and these numbers are crazy. It was shared by the Reagan movie and also reported on by a bunch of others. But of course, the leftist, crazy, hate-filled critics gave the movie 17% approval, and the audience, though, gave it 98%. So
90.
this discrepancy, and as the Reagan movie has put out and said, it with all this hate, it must be really good.
Yeah, it's great.
Must be the best movie ever, actually, was their response
Yeah,
with
yeah,
all of this
with all
hate.
this hate, it must be great. And it kind of reminds me, again, they're saying that the movie is hagiographic, one-sided. We've got a montage in the middle of the film where we air every leftist hate thing against Reagan, blaming him for AIDS victims, warmonger. We include all of that stuff. And I had one person, a student, after we saw the screening at the Guthrie in local theater here in Grove City, came up to me and said, you know, Dr. Kengor, I don't get this. There's all that hate and division in the middle in 1984 with all these protesters. And then he won 49 out of 50 states. How did that happen? And I said, well, because you always have a small minority of elite leftists who hate like that. But then the country as a whole loved him and liked him, including so many Democrats. And what you're seeing now with the reviews, once again, you know, the reviewers, the critics, are these like leftist, New York, LA media elites who are hating on him again. So there's always this stark juxtaposition between this very vocal, nasty, angry, tiny minority, and then everybody else, the silent majority in the country that likes him. So in a way, that, you know, the reaction to the film in 2024 is a lot like the reaction of the country 40 years ago in 1984.
Yeah, that's so right, and it does mirror that because it is just a small group of people who are just blasting the movie, but the American people, the people who have seen it, have given it such high ratings, high reviews, so those numbers show exactly that, what you're describing, that where the people are and where the elite are not in line, and they are not
Right.
the same, and that's something to remember when looking at politics now, and obviously we can see that pretty clearly just in the political sphere, even just by watching the media, watching some of the polling, things like that. What
You
the
know,
media puts out is not always in line with the American public. I'd argue it generally isn't in, in line at all.
yeah, one of the reviewers gave the movie a 1, a rating of 1 out of 5. And Bob Terrell read a section of it to me. And at first I was like speechless. And then I just started laughing. I thought, you know, this is like a caricature, right? Like if you wanted to sit down to like write a caricature of an angry leftist reviewing a film about Reagan, here's what you would say. And I
Yeah.
had somebody say to me a few days ago, who's a movie critic, he said, you know, be thankful for that person giving it a 1, because it tells everybody right off, don't take this seriously, because you
Yeah.
don't give anything a 1. You know, the worst low quality B movie might get a 1, but probably gets a 2, right? You know, if she had given it, you know, a 2.5 or a 3, then people might have given more. But the 1 is just kind of a way. You get to the end of the review and you see that, you just go, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I'd like to know what she would give a 5 to in that case. But
right.
let's talk about Bob Tyrrell quickly because he wrote a piece also for the American Spectator calling for an Oscar for Dennis Quaid,
Yeah.
praising the movie and his performance. That really great piece by him, really interesting that you can check out at spectator.org. But you have
I,
more background on this because you worked with him on it, talked to him about it. I'm sure that the viewers would love to hear how this came about.
Yeah, so R. Emmett Till Jr., our founder of the American Spectator in 1967, and how old is Bob? 80 years old. He'll be 81 in December. And Bob, after releasing his memoirs about a year ago, he's kind of stopped writing his column for a little while. I don't think he's written a column in at least a year, maybe a year and a half. So he read some of the reviews, and he read the one in particular I'm talking about that gave it a 1, and he just said, Paul, I can't believe this. I mean, there's just, look at this hate for Reagan. I mean, the movie can't be this bad. I said, it's not, Bob. It's really good. You should see it. I mean, the acting alone by Quaid and some of the others merits, I mean, way better than 1. And so Bob was at the Jersey Shore, as he says in his column, and I said, Bob, you know, you and Jean, your wife, you know, go see if you can have Gene find the movie for you. All right, you guys go see the movie tonight. So he called me, and he was blown away. He couldn't believe how good it was. So he sat down and he wrote a column, and he said that he thinks Dennis Quaid ought to get an Oscar. I've had a number of people tell me that. So I've since posted that on
My
Twitter.
family too.
Yeah, yeah, and I've said, Dennis Quaid should get an Oscar. Some people are calling for him to get an Oscar. I think, and I said this when I was in Santa Barbara to you a couple weeks ago. Penelope Ann Miller, who plays Nancy Reagan, I think she merits an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. I mean, she's really good, really good at this role. And Bob and Dennis Quaid and all of this have a little bit of a connection because the movie Breaking Away, which I don't know if you've ever seen it, Grace. It is really good.
No, and we talked about that last episode too, how
It's so good.
there was that connection and that you brought that up to Dennis Quaid when you met him.
Yeah, so that movie came out in 1979. It was Dennis Quaid, one of his first movies, one of his first major roles. People watching will remember Dennis Quaid is the guy who jumps into the quarry to swim and goes through like the refrigerator and plays a prank on the guys in the quarry. That quarry is actually in Indiana University, Bloomington, which is where the American Spectator was founded. And the guy who wrote the script for Breaking Away was named Steve Tessich. He was a roommate of Bob Terrell. And he was one of the early literary editors for the American Spectator. He won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay of Breaking Away. So I was working on the history of the American Spectator, and I was in Bloomington. I went there to, long story, I had to go there for different reasons, working on the history. And then the next day, I drove to Guthrie, Oklahoma, made this long road trip with my son, Mitch. There was no way to fly from these places, right? And so I met Quaid on the set of Guthrie, Oklahoma. First we met, we were talking in his trailer. And I said, hey, I got to tell you, I was just in Bloomington, Indiana yesterday, and I know that you did the film Breaking Away. And he said that's one of my favorite films. Talked about how much he enjoyed it. And I said, I was looking for the quarry. And we started talking about the quarry that they swam in, which a young Bob Terrell in college drove drove his sedan into the quarry, jumped out before he drove it in. So we really kind of talked and bonded over the quarry. So Terrell knows of Quaid way back because of Terrell's roommate. There you go,
This
his
is
memoir.
his book, by the way, so I just
Yeah,
was able to find it behind me in this bookcase as you were talking, but this is Bob Tyrrell's memoir, so make sure that you check that out.
right. And so Bob was really impressed with the performance by Quaid in Reagan, and it's really good. The acting alone by all the different characters, John Voight as Victor, David Henry as a young Reagan, Leslie Ann Down as Margaret Thatcher, Jennifer O'Neill as Nell Reagan. She has a very interesting story. She goes way back. They all did such a great job, all
Yeah,
of which
no,
is why you could never, any sane person not poisoned by ideology could never give this movie a 1. That is just ridiculous.
it's absurd, and the fact that it's been censored on Facebook too, it's continued to be censored on Facebook since it's come out. People have had trouble with their posts being taken down. It's just completely absurd. But you also had a
Hate,
piece for
censorship, and division. That's what the libs are doing.
oh,
Yeah.
completely, and of course they blame the
Blaming
other
us
side
for
of
all
doing
those things.
that, but
Right. That's right.
yeah, you know what? The evidence is there though,
You can't
really.
even give them a movie with no shots of the Democrats, about unity with a happy ending, which is what they say that they want in an election year of all times, and have them be happy. It's amazing.
It's crazy, that's what it is. It's absolutely
It's crazy.
ridiculous, and it's frustrating and annoying, really.
Yes.
But you wrote a piece for the American Spectator this past week where you shared a really cool story about I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but Yakob Ravin is the
Yeah.
name, and he shared this exclusive picture with you in the American Spectator, which is never before seen. He sent you this note with this story. It would be wonderful if you would tell the audience about this.
Oh, it's such a good story. So I closed the book, The Crusader, which is the book that the movie's based on, with the story of Reagan now in the throes of Alzheimer's disease. All right. So he wrote that November 1994 letter about riding off into the sunset of his life. Now it's 3 years later. It's the summer of 1997. He's really fading fast. And he's walking through the park, Arm& Hammer Park, with the Secret Service near his home in Bel Air. And this Jewish immigrant from Ukraine named Yakob Ravin comes up to him, says, "Mr. President, thank you for all that you did for me, for my people, for the Jewish people, for freeing our country from communism." And this confused Reagan kind of looks at him and says, "Well, that was my job. That was my job." And in the book, it's so touching, Grace, because as I say up to that point, Reagan was such a humble guy that you really couldn't get him. In fact, Bill Clark, who I was so close to and was his biographer, and he's featured in the movie a lot, one of the things I like the most about the movie. And I said, "Bill, did you ever hear Reagan say, you know, Bill, we did it. We took down the Soviets"? And he said, "No, Paul, he was too humble to say that. This was a man of great humility. But I heard him one time when someone came up to him, late 80s, early 90s, thanked him for taking down the Soviet Union. And Reagan said only, no, it was a team effort by the hand of divine providence." Well, here Reagan, in this kind of moment of weakness, who can't even remember living in the White House. We show that at the end of the film too. And he says to Yakob Ravin, right? He says, you know, "Well, that was my job, right? That was my job." And he said, "Here's my grandson, Rostic is his name. Would you pose for a picture?" And the Secret Service is like, "No, no." And Reagan says, it's okay." So they took this picture of Reagan and Rostic together, and they sitting on a bench together. As far as I know, it's the last public picture of Reagan. So I get an email from this reader named Rob Loeb, who said, "I read about this in your book, and I saw that Yakob is from Toledo, Ohio. I'm from Toledo, Ohio. So I thought I would go look him up." So Rob found him. He's 92 years old at this nursing home in Toledo, Ohio. And he told him about my book. The guy, he didn't even know about my book and that I had written about him. And Rob said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, he wrote this book about it. He has a movie coming out based on the book." So Rob sent me pictures of him and Yakob, told me kind of the rest of the story. Rostic, this little boy, who the only words that he knew was, "I don't speak English." He's now a doctor in Gainesville, Florida, goes by the name Ross.
Right near where I am.
Yeah, is that right? You're in
Mhm.
Gainesville? Oh,
About an
wow.
hour
Oh, you got to look him
or
up.
so, something like that. Yeah, not far at
Yeah.
all. I will
Yeah,
have to now, yeah.
yeah, you'll have to. And so they touched base, and Rob connected me with him. Just today, I sent him and I sent Jacob and Rostic both signed copies of the book. I printed out the copies of the articles from the American Spectator, put them in the package. So it's a great kind of rest of the story. So we got the final picture. We published it there in that article in the American Spectator, we believe, of Ronald Reagan in public.
Wow, that's so incredible. I mean, what a cool story, and this is the kind of thing, it's just so cool to hear about, and kind of as you mentioned in your piece, because of your role as a Reagan biographer, and because you've written more books than anyone else on Reagan, and your close relationship with Bill Clark, and the people around him, you have people reach out to you with these really cool stories, so you really have gotten the inside and the background, and that's been so cool for myself, and I know all everyone else watching, especially as we've all watched this movie now come out, being able to hear this background has been so insightful and so helpful in watching the movie and in just understanding more about Reagan's life. So it's all really cool. And one of the big takeaways from the movie is, and it kind of ties into this and into the story that you just told about that young man thanking Reagan, is that you can never let your guard down because communism is always wanting to take over. And that was certainly a lesson that came from the movie and from Reagan and all that he did. And I think a lesson that we can take away now, that big takeaway is one that's really important to point out as well.
Yeah, and in fact, we quote in the movie, we have B.E. Kirchman, the Russian Jewish dissident at Reagan's Disciples of Christ Church, November 11th, 1928. And that's played by the actor Ilya, oh, this guy, why can't I say his last name? He's in Spider-Man. In fact, I spent some time with him on the set, and I said, "You look familiar." He said, "Have you seen Spider-Man? I'm the guy that says, 'Rent, rent.'" And I said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, I got it." But he plays B.E. Kirchman, and the young Reagan, played by David Henry, is sitting next to his girl, Muggs Cleaver, in the church. and Kevin Sorbo is the pastor, Ben Cleaver, and you hear B. Kirchman said, freedom is never a generation away from extinction, always a generation away from extinction. And the young David Henry Reagan's like, yeah, I got it. And that article that I did for Spectator, people can look at that. I also tell the story about learning from Herb Meyer and Bill Clark about the Soviet role in the attempted assassination of John Paul II. Speaking of communists taking life, right? So once for me as a biographer, historian, once I started writing these books on Reagan, that people who worked with Reagan and liked him and respected him knew that I was telling the truth about their guy that no one else had before, they started coming to me with stories like that. And you'll see a number of them in the film, including, and maybe we could wrap up with this, when Nancy says to Ronald Reagan in the movie, she's standing next to him after he's been shot by a bullet, and she said, Ronnie, if only I had been at your side, your left side, right, when you walked out of that building, then she could have taken the bullet for him. I got that from the Reverend Louis Evans, who was Reagan's pastor at the National Presbyterian Church in D.C., who called me after reading God and Ronald Reagan. I'd never met him before, and he had not long to live, and he wanted to tell me some stories that nobody knew. And he said, I got to tell you the story about Nancy Reagan. Met with her that night after the shooting, and she said, you know, Pastor, I'm struggling with this indefinable sense of guilt. I always stand near Ronnie's left side. And if I had only been standing at his left side when he walked out of that building, I could have taken that bullet for him. And I told that to Bill Clark, and Bill said, you know, Paul, you know, like the scripture verse says, she would have given her life for the life of her beloved, for her best friend. And I told that story again when Nancy died in March 2016. I wrote a Fox News op-ed piece for it, and Megyn Kelly read it, and she reached out to me and said, please come on my show and tell that story. And the story is in the movie. In the movie, they do a little differently. She's not talking to Louis Evans, the pastor. She says it directly to Ronnie when he's recovering. But that really happened. So for you leftist critics, well, it's hagiography, corny, overly sentimental. Sorry, dude. Really happened. All right. Sorry. Hate to burst your bubble and might make you angry, but for the rest of us, we love it.
Yeah, and sorry you didn't learn anything to all of you out there.
Right,
I mean,
right.
sorry you didn't
And it's
learn
okay
anything.
for husband and wife to adore each other, okay? All right? For him to write all these love letters to her, rowing on the true
Oh
love,
yeah, I have a
right?
book. There's a book of the love letters. I
There's a
have
whole
it.
book of the love letters,
Mhm.
right? If you didn't get that in your own life, with your spouse, I don't write letters like that to my wife, right? Susan will tell you, right? But he did. They treated her like a queen, and she glowed. Ronnie is my hero, right? That's the
Yeah,
way
and
that
how
it was.
refreshing. How refreshing, and it's such an encouragement in family values, which is
Yeah,
how it should be. But of course, we're the weird ones for thinking that
yeah,
family values are good, because
right.
apparently now it's better to do the opposite,
He's
which
at the tombstone of his mother. You'll see this in the movie Grace. Lord, thank you for my mother, crying. That actually happened. Okay, all right. Sentimental hogwash. You're an idiot. All right. That
they
it
should probably
happened.
read your
It's a
book.
good thing, right? It's
Mhm.
nice.
It's a good story. It's
Sorry if it makes you
unifying.
miserable.
Yeah, and they should really read your book then because they probably don't know what they're talking about.
Right. Do some of your own reading. Sheesh.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, with that, the movie is doing well. So on a good note, it's doing well, doing great. Um, the left is mad, but what else is new?
Right.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode. Enjoy the next week, and we're so excited to see you here next week for the Weekend Spectator. Thanks for watching. Make sure that you share with your friends and that you go to spectator.org for more.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.